One of the very best basketball recruits in the country will be on an official visit to Louisville this weekend.
You are Locked On Louisville, your daily podcast on the Louisville Cardinals. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Card Nation, what is going on, everyone? Welcome into this Wednesday edition of the Locked On Louisville podcast. I'm your host, Dalton Pence. I want to take this time to personally thank you all for making us your first listen of the day. Just a reminder, Locked On Louisville, free and available on all streaming services 5 days a week, your team every day. Today's episode of the show is brought to you by FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. All you have to do is visit FanDuel.com to get started. A huge visit this weekend for the Louisville men's basketball program. Top 5 prospect Nate Ament will be on an official visit with Pat Kelsey's program starting on Friday. We'll discuss how that is going to be a challenging recruitment to win, but it is still significant that Louisville is still involved with the top talent across the country. We will then dive into the weekly mailbag, some great questions surrounding Isaac Brown potentially being a starter, reassessing the outlook for the football team, discussing whether or not Louisville is wasting some of the top talent, and much more questions that you all have introduced that I will attempt to answer coming up in the second and third segments, respectively, on the show. But to begin, we start in the men's basketball side of things. Nate Ament, one of the top prospects in the country. He's ranked as the 4th best player, according to not only 24/7 Sports, but the 24/7 Sports composite. 2nd best power forward, number 1 player in the state of Virginia, 6'9", 185 pounds, plays for Highland School in Warrenton, Virginia. The 2025 five-star prospect is starting his official visit to Louisville on Friday, according to Adam Zagoria and Jamie Shough. He will then make his way to Knoxville for a visit next Saturday with the Tennessee Volunteers. But this is yet another 5-star prospect that Louisville has gotten involved with and has gotten them onto campus for an official visit. In itself, this is significant news because we're not really accustomed to this being the norm at Louisville. Louisville's usual recruiting grounds are recruiting the high 4-star, middle-of-the-road 4-star player that is able to come to Louisville, not be expected to play right away, develops, and then is a contributor for the program for multiple seasons. Usually that is the program's recruiting MO, no matter how good the Cardinals have been, right? Even when you had the run in the late 2000s, early 2010s, when Louisville was a perennial national championship contender, they still didn't recruit that much 5-star talent. And if they did, they weren't seriously involved. So I think that this shows 2 things. Number one, the Louisville name still holds some weight. Now, to really reap those benefits, the Cardinals have to start winning games, right? But number 2, I think that Louisville's NIL infrastructure that they put in place has brought them onto maybe not necessarily a level playing ground with Duke and Kentucky and Kansas, but the gap has closed significantly. The shoe companies still do play an impact, but it's not as large of an impact as it was, let's say, in 2014. So putting this by itself, it is significant that Louisville has a top 5 prospect on campus. And Nate Ament is a true top 5 prospect. Like, we're talking about a player that many scouts, both in the high school ranks and also like NBA draft scouts, believe that the long-term tools for this guy could lead him to be the best player in the 2025 class. Like, he is that good of a player. He's a little bit raw because he's 6'9", 185 pounds. He has to put on some more strength, has a thin frame at the moment, but him being able to continue to add some more strength to that frame is going to only benefit him down the road. But that doesn't stop him from putting the absolute talent overload on display. Ament may be 6'9", but he moves like a guard. He can create his own shot off the dribble. The shot is mechanically sound, so there's nothing wrong with the form. Last high school season, 19.3 points a game, 7.8 rebounds, to go with 4 blocks. He has a 6'11" wingspan. As a power forward, I think he's one of those stretch 4, but more so in the mold of being a point forward. He kind of creates for himself to be, I think, right away in college, it's going to be interesting to see what his role is going to be, because I think his floor is a secondary scoring option. I think the ceiling is, you're talking about definitely high lottery, top primary scoring option, good rim protector. But again, he has to add some frame or add some weight onto his frame to really be able to reap the benefits of that talent, because there's really not much he can't do in the half court. Really crafty with the ball in his hands. He, according to multiple high school analysts, they have said that he's starting to develop that alpha mindset. Shout out to Adam Finkelstein, director of scouting of 24/7 Sports, that said that we're also just starting to see the first signs of an alpha mentality in Ament. He's come up the ranks as someone who was content to blend in and rarely looked to really assert himself. Now we're gradually starting to see him get more assertive, and the expectation is that could come in correlation with the progression of his body. So you're starting to see him really just get better and better. And I think the question is not when he's going to reach a ceiling, it's how high that ceiling is going to be, because there's a ton of potential. So he's a true bona fide top 3, top 5 prospect that's already good enough to warrant that praise, but also the talent and the ceiling is so high here that, yeah, it just makes sense. And his skill set benefits a Pat Kelsey system that runs a lot up and down the court. They shoot a lot of threes. They move without the ball, and Ament really plays into fitting into that system. But I will say that right now it seems like Duke might be at the forefront of this recruitment with Shelton Henderson, and that is a tough thing to hear. I've been told by my source that Duke is really starting to gain some more traction in this recruitment, and it leads them to the point where they don't feel good about Louisville's chances at the moment. And that is a huge swing of how things were being interpreted just a week ago. So, and we know that Duke can turn up the heat very, very quickly. We don't know what the Boozer twins are going to do. If they go to Miami, that might definitely hurt the Louisville chances. But even if they go to Duke, we've seen multiple 5-star players seemingly join a log jam of minutes to be able to be a part of that program. And that's really tough for Louisville at this point. There's the rumors that Ament would like to be a part of a package deal with Henderson, which I guess would make sense. Seems like they're good friends, but it would suck for Louisville, because if Duke is trending for one of the two, then obviously it seems like the writing is on the wall. Texas got a visit from Ament. Tennessee's getting one. There's questions as to whether or not he's going to decide yet. I think he's going to take his time, from what all accounts are leading those to believe. Plays on the Adidas 3 SSB circuit, which can't hurt the Cardinals. To show you how good he is offensively, listen to these shooting splits. 47% from the field, 42% from 3, and 90% from the free throw line. That is ridiculous, especially for a 6'9" forward. Like that's borderline unheard of. It's nuts. But yeah, at this point, it's just one of those situations where Louisville is being involved, or they're involved with these highly rated players, but nothing has paid off yet. And yes, it is nice that Louisville is involved, but Louisville is without a commitment. We are on August 9th, and there is not a basketball commitment to the 2025 class. We mentioned back in the summer, well, it's not time to panic because we're still a ways away. Right now, Louisville doesn't have a commitment. It's time for them to get a couple of high school commitments. I know that it's probably going to be another portal-heavy class. Excuse me. But at the end of the day, you still want to see Pat Kelsey get some high school commitments for the future. So we'll see if Louisville is able to land a big fish in the 2025 class. Right now, they haven't been able to with Darren Peterson and other prospects, but they're still involved and they're getting some big-time visits. So that's significant in itself. You hope that Louisville is able to switch some things up and get that momentum turning in the other direction after the visit on Friday. So hopefully it goes well. But nonetheless, this is really key news that Louisville is still being involved with these recruits when historically suggesting that's not always been the case. So it's nice. It really is. But eventually you have to land someone, right? That's what it comes down to. The efforts have to pay off eventually. When we come back, we're going to answer some main questions that you all have, like what should be done with Isaac Brown? Is he the starter moving forward? Is Louisville wasting the talent they have? Like Tyler Shough, Ja'Cory Brooks, and Colin Lacey? We'll answer those questions coming up on the next segment of Locked on Louisville. Today's episode of the show is brought to you by FanDuel. NFL fans, you can start the season with a large return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. When you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. If you go to FanDuel.com and look at the odds, Louisville is about a touchdown favorite over the Virginia Cavaliers this weekend. It's a very key game for the Cardinals. I simply don't know what to do with that spread because the Cardinals didn't really do well with the SMU spread. And this game is on the road in a place where they historically don't play well. You can check out all of Louisville's odds and player props on FanDuel.com, America's #1 sportsbook. Cardinal fans, thanks again for making Locked on Louisville your first listen of the day. Just a reminder, the show is free and available on all streaming services 5 days a week, your team every day. We're doing something a little different. This is the first time that we've done this, but usually we have one segment that is dedicated to the weekly mailbag. And this week, there were many questions that I didn't really feel comfortable answering in a short amount of time. So I broke the episode up into 2 segments where we'll answer 6 key questions. If you would like to submit a mailbag question, you can drop them in the YouTube comment section below, tweet them at LO_Louisville, or you can see my Twitter handle at dpence_ for those that can't see it and that those are listening. You can submit them via DM. My DMs are open for everyone if you want to submit a question. Shout out to the 6 questions that will be answered on this show. It begins, and all 6 of these are on the football side, just for full transparency. The first one is one of the more key questions, and that is, should Isaac Brown be the starter moving forward for the Cardinals? Brown has over 200 more yards than any other running back on the team. Keywan Brown is second, Duke Watson third. I know Maurice Turner's been hurt, but Don Chaney is 4th on this list. Brown has 39 carries for 362 yards, 9.3 yards per carry, and 1 touchdown. Now, he jumped out onto the scene with a very good performance against Austin Peay, 5 for 123 and a touchdown. We chalk that up to, well, he's got a lot of potential, right? But he's playing a really bad opponent. He followed the next 2 performances up, 8 for 43 against Jacksonville State, 3 for 7 against Georgia Tech. And maybe it felt like that question was going to be answered that, yeah, he's going to be a rotational piece, maybe even a redshirt candidate, but maybe not at this point. He had 13 of 72 against Notre Dame, caught 4 passes for 23 yards and a touchdown in that game. And then the SMU game rolls around. 10 carries, 117 yards, averaged 11.7 yards per carry, caught 5 passes for 44 yards. Should he be the starter moving forward? My answer is 100% yes. Isaac Brown is the most talented running back on the team. I said it in the offseason that he's the most talented player in the group, and no disrespect to anyone else. It's just more so an indication of how good he is. It might have just taken a little bit to get the opportunity. And that was a buy-sell question that I asked weekly co-host Grant Mulligan is Isaac Brown going to be a top 2 running back on this team by the end of the season? He sold that. And I'm thinking to myself, man, I think he's going to get the opportunity to prove it. And he has. And at this point, we don't know the availability of Maurice Turner. He's still injured. Kewan Brown has been good. It's been a little rough at times for Don Chaney Jr. He's been hurt some. Duke Watson, it looks like might need to continue to add some weight, get better in pass pro. The only concern that I might have about Isaac Brown is being 5'9", 190 pounds. Is he going to be good in blocking in pass pro? And that might be one of the main questions, because if he's not, when he's in the game, you're almost tipping your hand that either he's running or going to be used in the passing game. But ultimately, I think that the benefits outweigh the drawbacks because he is extremely explosive. He's shown at times that his vision can be elite. Like, not only can he hit the holes really hard and get through the gaps, but he also has the vision and patience to be able to pick and choose the gaps that he goes through. Very Jawar Jordan-esque. He's gotten those comparisons from Jeff Brom. He reminds me a ton of young Jawar Jordan. And if he turns out to be Jawar, well, what a home run you just hit, right? And I think he's going to continue to be your best running back. So, yes, for me, Isaac Brown should be the starter for the Cardinals moving forward at running back. The second question is an interesting one. It is Louisville wasting some of the top talent that they have? More specifically, Ja'Cory Brooks, Tyler Shough, Colin Lacey, Ashton Gelati, and Quincy Riley. Well, I think that this kind of goes for every program. I wouldn't necessarily, like, I would never phrase it that way, because that's a really brutal way to say it. I don't think that they're wasting the talent, but you're not taking advantage of the talent you have by losing these games. We said Louisville is 3-2. They have way too much talent to be 3-2. Yes, Quincy Riley has missed some time, but this team is really, really talented. So do you really want to have a season where you bring back your top 2 defensive players, you bring in Tyler Shough, Colin Lacey, and Ja'Cory Brooks, and you don't live up to the expectations? Well, of course, that's not what you want. I won't ever say that Louisville is wasting the talent, because at the end of the day, I mean, it's wins and losses. Like, that's just not the way that I'm thinking about things. But you don't want to look back on this season and say, damn, man, how has Louisville only got this record, 7-5 or 8-4, and they had their most talented team since 2016 and maybe even before that? That's the conversation that we don't want to have. That's why I'm saying, like, Louisville has to turn things around, like, right now. Like, they have to do it against Virginia. So, no, I'm not going to say that they're wasting the talent, because that's just not the way that I want this to be phrased. And I think that that puts a connotation on it that makes it seem like, oh, well, Louisville's just extremely, bad at looking out for their student athletes. I'm not going to say that. I mean, I'm just saying that you don't want a situation where you have all this talent, kind of like Lamar 2016, 2017. You have all that talent, and the record you are what your record says you are. So it doesn't matter if you have the talent if you don't live up to that. The final question before we get to the back half of the mailbag: does Louisville have to win out to get to the ACC Conference Championship game? Obviously, the matchup against Kentucky at the end of the year won't necessarily have much of an implication on it. But long story short, to get to the championship game with an undefeated Miami right now, undefeated Clemson, SMU undefeated at the moment. If you would have beaten SMU and lost to, say, like Georgia Tech, maybe you have a different conversation. But with SMU having to play Duke, Pitt, Boston College, Virginia, and Cal, I'm going to say it. If Louisville wants to get back to the ACC championship game, they're going to have to win out in conference play. I think that that's the most likely way, because SMU does not have an ACC loss. Now, could it be a situation where the only way I don't see that happening is if, number one, SMU loses? Well, they've got the head-to-head as well. That's the issue here. SMU would have to lose 3 games, and you would have to have Miami and Clemson also lose another game, and you defeat Miami and Clemson. And it's a lot of what-ifs, a lot of hypotheticals, but clear-cut, conference standing gymnastics aside, Louisville would have to win out, in my opinion, to get to the ACC championship game. That's all I'm going to say about that. When we come back, what is the new Louisville football outlook? Is the portable model for Jeff Brom sustainable? And does Ron English survive the season as Louisville's defensive coordinator? We'll answer all those questions coming up on the final segment of Locked on Louisville. Today's episode of the show is also brought to you by Game Time. Game Time is the official ticket marketplace of Locked On for all your sports, music, theater, and comedy events near you. Game Time, look, ever since I downloaded their app, it's over. That's all I've used since then. I got tickets to Louisville SMU on Game Time. I'm getting tickets to Louisville Miami. Guess what? On Game Time, because all the features, it just makes sense, y'all. If you download the app, just download it. It takes like 10 seconds. You'll be able to toggle the all-in pricing feature that allows you to see the pricing up front without surprise fees. You get the panoramic view from your seat. You get some of the best ticket insurance company or insurance coverage, I should say, across the board. And there's the Game Time lowest price guarantee. So that means if you find tickets in the same section and row for less, Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game Time. And into the final segment of this Wednesday edition of the Locked on Louisville podcast. I want to take this time to thank everyone who brought a question into this week's edition of the Mailbag. If you have a question you want answered for next week, be sure to answer or to ask before next Monday. Drop them in the YouTube comment section below. Some key questions about not maybe this season, but about this season, but more so a larger picture scope of things. The first question: how do you reassess Louisville's outlook? Predict the record after the SMU loss. Well, if you all knew before the season, I predicted Louisville at 10 wins. And I said that those losses were either going to come to Notre Dame or Miami and Clemson. And one came to Notre Dame, and then you lost the game you were not supposed to. So right now, knowing what we do about Louisville with Miami, with Clemson, and with Kentucky still left on the schedule, not to mention a ranked Pittsburgh, a road game against Boston College, and a road game against Virginia where you never play well. What does the record have right now? Oof, this is a tough one because people aren't going to be happy. From what I see with Louisville at the moment, I'm going 7-5. Offensive line has been really, really rough. It's not a small fix either. It's something that's going to be a challenge to fix, even with the injuries moving forward. And then not to mention that, but you also have the defensive issues. I mean, you've got Miami coming up. You have at Clemson, Kentucky, all three with a really good defensive line. All three are able to run the football and have explosive players on the team. So I'm going to say 7-5. It doesn't make me feel good saying it, but we got to be realistic. And that is that Louisville just has not looked up to the expectations that we put on them. So at this point, I'm going to say 7-5. Is the Jeff Brom portal model sustainable? Jeff Brom has used the portal over the high school ranks to address the team needs. Now, the first offseason was a little bit different. He didn't have much time, so he had to utilize the portal to fill the holes. This offseason, the Cardinals have, at the moment, like the second worst Power 5 or Power 4 recruiting class in front of Vandy. The high school recruiting class really hasn't looked all the greatest. It looks like it's going to be yet another portal model for the Louisville Cardinals. Is this portal model sustainable? Well, Jeff Brom has said that it's not going to be the same every year, but I will say that going portal heavy every season and having to take 30 new transfer portal players a year doesn't feel all that sustainable. I think it has to be more towards 50-50, 60-40, not really 80-20, like just because it's hard to really build a program that way. It's like Arkansas basketball. You'll have a couple years where it goes great, and then some where it might not necessarily look the greatest. I think, if anything, that offensive line recruiting, defensive line recruiting mainly offensive line, it would be more beneficial to do better in high school recruiting, because you're also at the mercy of, who enters the portal, right? And at this point, it feels like constantly changing your team every year. And I know that Louisville is at the mercy of the current landscape of college football, where people enter the portal a lot. It's hard to get a guy to bet on themselves and wait their time and not, desire or not required to play immediately, or they're going to transfer out. So Jeff Brom's in a tough spot, but I do think that the portal model that's sustainable is one that you build up with the high school class and then you supplement with the portal, or it's close to 50-50. So the last question: will Louisville make a change at defensive coordinator? Will Ron English be relieved of his duties before the end of the season? Let's play the hypothetical game. Let's say that the changes that Jeff Brom has talked about just are not made, and Louisville is on a collision course with having to do something about the defensive coordinator question. I don't see a situation where the Cardinals make a change during the season. Like, I think that if Jeff Brom parts with his longtime friend and a guy that has coached under his tenure at Purdue, I think it's going to be in the offseason. Or it could be a situation where he's not calling the plays. Because that's another situation that you could see that, well, you might keep Ron English on staff and he just might not call the plays. It might be Mark Hagan or Mark Ivy. It depends. But if you're telling me, Dalton, Ron English is not going to be on the Cardinal staff next offseason or next season, does the change come in the middle of this season, or is it after the season? I don't even think it's a question. I think it's after the season. I think that Jeff Brom, with his relationship with Ron English, will make that change at the end of the year. I feel like if a coach is being let go, usually it's at the end of the season when it relates to a coordinator. Head coach, it's a little bit different because you have to, there's a lot more factors that you have to put in place. But with it being a defensive coordinator, I just feel like that's a situation that would be resolved in the offseason. I'm hoping Louisville can just turn things around. That's the hope. That really, really is the hope. And with the relationship that English has with Jeff Brom, I just don't see a situation where he lets his friend go in the middle of the season before the season ends. I think he's going to give him every opportunity to switch some things around, and hopefully giving him the benefit of the doubt will work in the Cardinals' favor. So we'll see. But that is going to wrap up this episode of the show. Everyone have a great day. We will see you right back here